tactics that won't go stale, right, as we sort of get all the way into 2016 in engaging our communities as voters and whichever entity you turn out in order to be successful. So I'd love to hear from folks on the panel any particular tactics, messaging, outreach that you all have done to sort of bridge the intersectionalities of the API community, the Latino community, the immigrant community, with the work that you all are doing in the states and the places in which you all are doing it, to figure out sort of how do we move forward together and what's worked and maybe even what not worked. And I would love for you all to start thinking about tactics and things that you all have done on the ground that we can share in the room later when I get to the question and answer program, that we can share with folks up here, but also with each other in the room. And we're actually going to start with NextGen and Josie because we have a great, powerful video that NextGen produced on sort of how do we bring cultural competency into these national organizations when they're reaching out to our communities and making sure that we're holding them accountable to do that so that we can engage the folks and meet them where they are.
Ustedes saben que escribí recientemente sobre los problemas del cambio climático. Pero esta vez quiero hablar de un cambio en otro sentido. Un cambio positivo, un cambio que nos haga bien, un cambio, podríamos decir, redentor. Hoy la comunidad científica acepta lo que hace ya desde mucho tiempo denuncian los unidos. Se están produciendo daños tal vez irreversibles en el ecosistema. Se está castigando a la tierra, a los pueblos y a las personas de un modo casi salvaje. Reconocemos que las cosas no andan bien cuando el suelo, el agua, el aire y todos los seres de la creación están bajo permanente amenaza. Entonces, si reconocemos esto, digámoslo sin miedo, necesitamos y queremos un cambio. Este sistema ya no se aguanta. No lo aguantan los campesinos, no lo aguantan los trabajadores, no lo aguantan las comunidades, no lo aguantan los pueblos y tampoco lo aguanta la tierra, la hermana madre tierra, como decía San Francisco. Los pueblos y sus movimientos están llamados a clamar, a movilizarse, a exigir pacífica pero ordenadamente la adopción urgente de medidas apropiadas. Yo les pido, en nombre de Dios, que defiendan a la Madre Tierra. Para finalizar, quisiera decirles nuevamente que el futuro de la humanidad no está únicamente en manos de los grandes dirigentes, las grandes potencias y las élites. Está fundamentalmente en manos de los pueblos, en su capacidad de organizarse y también en su mano de responsabilidad y convicción este proceso de cambio. Los acompaña. Y cada uno necesitamos desde el corazón. Ninguna familia sin vivienda, ningún campesino sin tierra, ningún trabajador sin derecho, ningún pueblo sin soberanía, ninguna persona sin dignidad, ningún niño sin infancia. Ningún joven sin posibilidades, ningún anciano sin la venerable fe. Sigan con su lucha y por favor cuiden mucho a la Madre Tierra.
He's a great organizer, huh? Yeah. So I think we have to, that film, by the way, was filmed in Bolivia. Next Gen Climate sent some representatives to Bolivia. They met with the Pope, they came back and had a meeting in Fresno, where they came from with 250 leaders in Fresno, and we're beginning to think about how we're going to organize around climate change, around justice. So I think that we have to enter this conversation from the point of view of justice. Justice for immigrants in this country and around the world. Justice for workers who are suffering from wage threat and getting ripped off every day and not able to support their families. Justice for women who deserve the right to choose. Justice for people who are improperly incarcerated, right? But the problem is that I, who have worked in the labor movement, as I said, for 30 years, wake up in the morning and think just about the labor movement. How am I going to raise these workers' rights? How am I going to protect those workers? How can I get more people into the union? And that's the proper thing for me to think about, except that I am then siloed, and you are then siloed. All of us, no matter what our passion and the bulk of our time, we now need to have a single, unified strategy where anyone can enter into justice, a narrative about justice. And I can be about this justice, and you can be about that justice, but in the end, we must be together in a single, unified strategy in order to win in 2016. Do you agree? I didn't know what to do about climate change. You know, do I change my light bulbs? Do I ask my kids to recycle the water? Yeah, you know, what I can do, what we all can do to take this country back for all of us is to stand for justice for all of us and develop a strategy in the elections and between now and then to organize our communities. Latinos poll the very highest of any cohort of voters on climate change. More than 88% of Latinos believe that the president must take action to preserve the planet. It isn't good enough if he takes action. He has taken very bold action. What we have to do is stand up and defend him when he's right, take him on when he's wrong, and organize in each and every one of our precincts so that we can win in 2016 for justice.
I will not be as inspirational. So there's a couple things about tactics. I think from Planned Parenthood's perspective, if you look at it, right, we're a national organization, big pink shirts everywhere, right? It's taking a step back for us and being able to realize kind of what is our role and what is our presence in the larger world, right? And to just point about, we're focused on one theme constantly, right? And that's protecting women's rights to access affordable quality healthcare, right? And so when we take a step back, that fight happens in what kind of world, right? And for our community, it's in the context of the immigration fight. So part of the way that we did that is borrowing from community organizers in the model and actually going into communities and hiring young Latinos, right? Because I personally got tired of hearing that there's a pipeline issue. And so we put our money where our mouth is and we hired young Latinos and created the RAICE program, which is a program in 5 states that works directly with the Latino community. And those organizers work within the communities on a localized level. Many of them are active on immigration. Many of them were responsible for enrolling over 700,000 Latinos in the ACA. Many of them do work on citizenship campaigns across the board. And so it's being able to do that and being able to allow that talent to also rise and making sure as a national that we are making that investment. The other piece of that, because that takes care of some of the youth perspective, right, and gives us some new ideas and helps, they're really helping to push the Federation in a really awesome and uncomfortable way for folks to start looking at issues differently and to be more inclusive. Also looking at our Promotoras program, which community health workers, and so those women have been working, some of them for Planned Parenthood for 30-something plus years. And being able to take the wisdom, make sure that they're involved in building curriculum, and how do they talk to the different generations within our community about women's health, and how that all ties back into not only political, but community empowerment, right? And having that bigger conversation what that looks like, and holding us responsible as the national office for providing resources and using our infrastructure, and to be frank, to use our privilege that we have as a national office to be accountable and help responsible for moving the work forward on the ground. So that's one of the things I think we have done, we're getting better at, things like making sure that we do take stances on issues of intersectionality, we're getting better at. But I think that particularly in my role as Latina, I hold it very true that we have to do more in immigration. At the same time, I would also challenge the immigration community to support us on women's health care also. And so I look forward to that conversation too.
So one of my tasks on the panel was to also talk about the Black Lives Matter movement, and so I'm going to pick that up now. And one of the things I think we've all seen is that we've actually seen conversations about race that are tied to the Black Lives Matter movement on television regularly in a way that we have not seen for a very long time in this country, if ever, right, in that kind of media. Part of that has to do, so as a tactic, right, part of that has to do with the choice to use the actual media that's out there that we can control, right? Never before have we had control of media through technology in the way that we do now. So we don't have to wait anymore for people to actually report on us. We can also create our own reporting and our own exchanges of information. One of the things that's come out of that increased visibility is a shift in people's willingness to actually consider even taking action or addressing the issue. Right, so both the intentional blindness, belief that it exists, but then also that something needs to be done. In the last 3 years worth of Pew Studies surveys, they've seen an enormous shift in the number of Americans who believe that actually more needs to be done to address race issues in the United States. And a significant part of this, I believe, is this visibility and this ongoing conversation. Right? We know that people live in racially segregated and culturally segregated communities in the United States, which means we may only interact at work sometimes with people who have a variety of differences from us, whatever those differences are. And so we may not talk about the things that matter most to us if we're only talking to people at work, which means that certain conversations may stay among certain groups of our friends, and depending upon how many cross-group friends you have in different ways, that may limit how much information is getting out. So the use of media is really important because that brings that to the fore for everyone. The other two pieces I'd like to talk about are bodies and spaces. So we had the question earlier about what's at stake, and I'll pick that up now. From the African American community perspective, one of the key things that stays at stake is literally a matter of life or death, right? Just straight up, on the line. Every 28 hours, a black man, woman, or child is killed by police or vigilante law enforcement. But also something that back in the late 1800s, W.E.B. Du Bois said, he said it's an issue of full enjoyment of national life. That's a point of commonality between the African American community, the immigrant community, the Latino community, women, transgendered, LGBTQ, disability. Any category that you can think of that is not fully enjoying national life, that's a common thread for everybody who is in that situation. If you do not have the wealth to actually enjoy full national life, right? And so this idea of actually getting to enjoy everything that you could, I'm going to pick that up again, so I'll leave that for a second. And then what I would also say is the point of commonality from the African American perspective or Black in the United States is that there's also 500,000 undocumented Black workers in the United States. So we have a common interest in the immigration cause that I think is not that well known in the African American community that could be brought up to a much more visible level. So there I pick up the media again, right, and think about how we represent that visually. And as we think about bodies and spaces, right, because that's the place, in addition to wages, but that I want to pick up as a place of being attacked, one place that we see that being effectively addressed in some countries, not as much in the United States, but it could be, is in the use of art. So actual art projects in the school or physical art installations, right? So if I think about an art installation and I think about, a young African American youth, so two large glass spaces, right? So you can leave it outside and an African American youth in a jail cell, and I see a young a person from another country, perhaps who looks Latino, who is in a holding cell or a detention center, right? Those images start to look similar to me, and I start to ask these questions about bodies and spaces and places, right? And an issue that we don't talk about as much is this freedom to be in a place and then be forced to be moved to another place, whether that be within the country or outside the country, right? And so that freedom of space and movement is both a place of commonality and an issue for both groups. And I think I'm going to wrap up briefly on this point by saying that common language and developing basic assumed responses for how to address certain issues is a way to reduce the pressure of having to think up a new way to do something every time. So the story that I would say for me that goes with that is that when I was a child, and I come from a labor family, and my parents were active in the farm movement in California, and the first time I went to school, and I was by myself, not the first time I went to school ever, but the first time I went to school and found that there was actually a strike. And I didn't know what to do. Was I supposed to go in? That was what I was supposed to do. But there was a strike. And so I went and I called my mother and I said, what do I do? And she said, well, we don't cross picket lines. And I said, oh, okay. Right, so for the rest of my life, that had always stayed with me, that my first response is always, oh, well, we're not doing that. And the second thing she told me was, she said, you need to ask yourself a question when you think about this. Because it's good to have a plan, but you need a way to think about it. She said, you need to stop and ask yourself, is whatever you're doing more important than someone else standing up for their rights? And every time the answer is no, you are either getting out of the way or you are going to help. Those are the two plans, and that's the steps to take.
Thank you. I would like to go back to this, talk a little bit about this issue of intersectionality, like going back to the first example. I would say Latinos were environmental friendly since before it was cool. And when we talk about like healthy cooking, about like eating locally, healthy and organically, we call it la receta abuelita, grandma's recipe. And I say this because I have another story. Like at my daughter's school, which is environmental and bilingual focused, it was like somebody decided that it was important to teach some low-income families about healthy cooking. And you're teaching people who have brought like recipes with like houses, different ways to make beans and make a very healthy meal with only beans and rice and a vegetable inside, right? So there is an accumulated wisdom, and I'm not idealizing like like everything that people of color do is like absolutely healthy and great, etc., etc. No, but there is an accumulated wisdom. We know how to understand things, we know how to frame them, we know how to communicate them. But we need to find that voice, and we need to make sure that voices are heard in these multi-ethnic, multi-issue spaces, in these coalitions, so that like all these ways to understand things are also reflected in the way we frame it and then we make decisions about how we're going to address them. And it's the same with the labor movement. Working American canvassers, when they're like, for instance, discussing healthcare, they run into immigrant households, and then people there, like the way they understand the issues by making reference to their home countries or the countries of their parents. And I say, like, my parents came from El Salvador, and it's such a small and poor country, and still the government had the responsibility to subsidize or pay for some percentage of the healthcare for the poor. How is it possible that in the United States, the wealthiest and most powerful country on earth, the government has, is left off the hook for that responsibility? We have ways to understand things. So we need to make sure that our organizations, particularly those of us who are part of organizations that are, have different constituencies, are not, we have different languages, ethnicities, and races. We need to make sure that all those voices are heard, are taken into account when making decisions, and are reflected fully in the leadership and the type of campaigns we focus on how we present
and we organize around